The title of my research project was Perceptions of RTI and the Effectiveness of Reading Interventionists. So a little bit of background: when we were choosing our internship sites and thinking about what we wanted to do our research on, I decided that I wanted to research something that had to do with RTI, just because I didn't know exactly which district I wanted to go to, and I knew that no matter what district I went to, they would be at some level of implementing RTI. So the objectives or hypotheses that I came up with based on the literature were just to find out reading interventionists' beliefs regarding RTI, their perceptions on RTI implementation in their district, and whether or not interventionists had an impact on fall and winter scores on screeners in reading. So I used interventionists here, but and though my participants were reading interventionists or academic interventionists within the district, but the same thing would be for teachers or school counselors, whoever are actually implementing interventions in the RTI model in that district. Just in my case, it was actually a reading intervention. So to give a little background, MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered System of Support, and this is an umbrella term that encompasses academics and behavior. So academics, when we talk about academics, the term is RTI, or response to intervention. And we talk about behaviors, the term is PBIS, or positive behavioral interventions and supports. So most commonly, RTI is associated with reading or literacy, but then also there is RTI in math, writing, science, and social studies. With PBIS, that's a wide range of different types of behaviors, so school-wide behaviors, attendance, social emotional learning, trauma, chemical dependency or substance abuse, and also bullying. So PBIS would cover all those types of behavior interventions. To go in more detail, since my research is about RTI, there's another visual that just explains what RTI is. And so with this visual, you do see that this triangle goes from 80% of students to 15 to 5% at Tier 3, and as the intensity of the intervention increases, the number of students served in that tier will decrease. So I did explain about MTSS and RTI. To go in a little bit more detail about Tier 2, because the interventionists that I was working with were implementing Tier 2 interventions, also Tier 3 sometimes. Tier 2 intervention offers more focused instruction than does the typical classroom reading instruction, and the reasons is because we want to remediate skill deficits, pre-teach and review skills for Tier 1 lessons, provide multiple opportunities to practice, and also to provide immediate corrective feedback. So it is important that we stick to the way that the model is supposed to be carried out. So that's where fidelity or integrity of implementation comes in. We won't get the best results if we don't implement with fidelity. Also, a little bit of background: in the state of South Carolina, in 2018, the governor issued a mandate that school districts should begin implementation of MTSS for the 2019-2020 school year. So that's another reason why no matter what district I went to in state, I felt like I would be able to do work with RTI. The existing research suggests that interventionists want more training, may not be confident in their ability due to a lack of training or education, and may not implement with fidelity due to a lack of training and confidence. So it's kind of like a cycle, and it all builds on the thing prior just because they don't have enough training or they feel like they need more training. So again, my research questions here are: what are reading interventionist perceptions of RTI, and are the reading interventionists that are used effective in improving reading outcomes? For the methods, what ended up happening is that in the district where I interned, they had hybrid weeks, e-learning weeks, and then full in-person weeks based on the COVID numbers. So I didn't want to be caught in a position where I wouldn't be able to collect my data. So what I did was a survey. So ultimately, everything could be done online. So my participants were a convenient sample of 3 reading interventionists from 2 different elementary schools in the district. The participants were interviewed and surveyed, and then I used FastBridge to compare the survey information with the data that they had actually collected on students that they served. Participant 1 was interviewed and surveyed, but the data from FastBridge was not analyzed for her caseload because there was no record that she had administered screeners for reading in the fall and winter using FastBridge. So she didn't have any groups in FastBridge, and so therefore I wasn't able to compare it to see when screeners were administered or anything like that. So I did use a survey that I had requested from some of the researchers that you'll see in my references, and they were kind enough to send me an early draft of a survey that they used in a study with school counselors. So I used that survey to create my survey and my interview questions that I did as a follow-up after the survey, and then like I said, I used FastBridge. I did an independent samples t-test to compare the group scores, so participant 2 versus participant 3, and then I did a dependent samples t-test to compare fall and winter scores. The participants were emailed the survey to complete, and then the responses were compared with progress monitoring data from FastBridge. So my results. The survey was broken up into 4 different parts. So each part gave a little bit more information or insight on that first question: what are reading interventionist perceptions of RTI? Part 1 was full of demographic questions. So I kind of compiled that information. So on average, each participant had about 32 students on their caseload. They had spent anywhere from 1 to 10 years at the current school where they were serving. They had spent anywhere from 11 to 15 or more years in the field. They either had a master's or a master's plus 30. Anywhere from 1 to 10 years had passed since they earned their last degree, and they had spent anywhere from 5 to 14 years teaching. Part 2 of the survey just looked at satisfaction and confidence with RTI. So overall, they felt that they were satisfied with their training, and they rated every item asking about confidence with RTI anywhere from some confidence to high confidence, except for 2 different areas. So they did 2 of the participants did state that they had little confidence in how to use RTI with data management, school-wide data management, and then also with parental involvement, how to get parents involved with the RTI model. Part 3 of the survey just looked at agreement with the different aspects of RTI. So all participants stated that they either agreed or strongly agreed that RTI was the best model to use. So the questions would ask, is RTI the best model to use to improve outcomes? Faculty in my school was knowledgeable about RTI and questions like that, and they agreed to strongly agree with all those statements. Part 4, I had questions about the frequency of delivery. So, I administered Tier 2, and they could rate monthly, daily, weekly. And the respondents either said monthly or daily they implemented Tier 2 interventions. Also with I progress monitor small groups, they all said that they did that monthly. The next question was, are the reading interventions that are used effective? And so this is where the statistics comes in. So the mean score for participant 2 was higher compared to participant 3 in the fall. However, the participant 2 group mean was not statistically significant or statistically different than the participant 3 group mean. So although participant 2 did have higher scores in her groups overall, there was no statistical difference in those scores. Also, the mean score for participant 2 was higher compared to participant 3 in the winter, and that had the same result. The participant 2 group mean was not statistically different than the participant 3 group mean. Finally, students scored higher in the winter compared to the fall. So no matter the group, regardless of which interventions they worked with. So using a dependent samples t-test, this difference was found to be statistically significant. And that did represent a large effect. So there was a difference between winter and fall scores. So in general, based on that survey, the interventions did have an overall positive view of RTI. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, the interventionists agreed that more training would be helpful in specific reading interventions for Tier 2, school-wide data management systems for documentation and decision making. So maybe for SST meetings or SIT team meetings, if there was like a school-wide system to collect this data that they get when they work with kids, they felt that that would be more helpful. And then finally, how to increase parental involvement within an RTI framework. They felt that they had not enough training in that area as well. So based on that, I ended up being able to present Tier 2 interventions to a group of interventionists, and not just on reading, but in math and behavior as well. So I did get to work with them on one of those areas. But also, one thing that the research found was the background of the interventionist did not matter. So I did say that some of the participants had a master's plus 30. As we can see, the participant didn't matter. There was no significant difference. So it didn't matter if one had more education or more experience. Those scores weren't the same. Where we saw differences was here in this next point, where students scored higher in the winter than in the fall. So that does suggest that there was growth. So what does this mean for the field? There should be more uniform training across the country, the state, or even just locally at the district level on RTI. Because if you look at my survey information, even across just 2 schools in one district, there were differences in the frequency of delivery, in the training, and where they even got most of their information that they knew about RTI, where it came from different professional developments, sometimes at the school level, sometimes at the district level. RTI should be taught in teacher training programs. So when I did the follow-up interviews with the interventionists, they did talk about how a lot of what they did was not aligned with what was being done at Tier 1 in the gen ed classroom. So sometimes the teachers would ask them, what are you working on with this student? So so that I can help them in that same area. And if it's implemented with fidelity, the way that RTI should work is that Tier 2 should be building on what is being done in Tier 1. So teachers need more knowledge about RTI in the Gen Ed classroom so that it can facilitate more growth when students work in Tier 2. And then also there should be more professional development for all parties involved, counselors, teachers, or interventionists, administrators, whoever is involved in RTI in that district, so that everyone knows their specific role. So kind of like what I talked about on that last bullet point, the Gen Ed teachers didn't really see what their part was in the whole system. So limitations of my research were the sample size. It already started off small. There were only 3 participants, and then one of them I couldn't even use all of that data, so that is a limitation. And then also it got kind of tricky because the groups that we analyzed may not reflect the students on each participant's roster. So these were lists of students who were screened by the participants in the fall and winter, but that might not necessarily reflect their caseload, because we don't know, we had no way of knowing in this research design if those students were served throughout the whole year or if they were just screened in fall and winter. We weren't able to find that out based on the information we asked. So we wanted to keep it anonymous up until a certain point and de-identified, so we didn't have all of that information. So future research should focus on having an evidence-based training curriculum, maybe versus a control group, to determine the best way to implement RTI, at a small case-by-case basis, or just like a case study. Something else could be done is to survey all a district's interventionists and not just a small sample, or to survey teachers at Tier 1 to kind of get them to understand their position in the RTI model. Here are my references. Thank you.